You're watching Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonprofit public affairs network, engaging the citizens of Wisconsin since 2007 through access to government proceedings and public policy events. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wisi.org/donate or by texting WISI to 44321.
Hosted by the Center for Politics and the People and its Student Advisory Board. We would like to also extend a warm welcome to people who are watching online via Wisconsin Eye. Thank you for being here tonight. Joining us for our panel today, we have Preston Reese-Grimm, myself. I'm a junior here at Ripon College, majoring in political science. I'm also the co-president of the Ripon College Republicans and the Ripon College Investment Club. To my right, your left, there's Sarah Thompson. She is a senior majoring in exercise science, and she is the co-president of the Ripon College Republicans and president of Phi Epsilon Kappa, the Exercise Science Honor Society. Next, we have our moderator, Henry Schatzinger. He is a professor of political science and the director of the Center for Politics and the People. Following that, we have Zoe Stefani. She is a sophomore here at Ripon College with an undeclared major, and she is the president of the Ripon College Feminists and the Student Senate Treasurer. Last but not least, we have Alivia Roeglin. She is a senior here at Ripon College, majoring in political science, psychology, and women's gender and sexuality studies. For campus involvement, she is the president of the Women and Gender Studies Club. Following the student panel discussion, there will be a Q&A session so you guys can ask questions to the panelists and hopefully interact with them. So be sure to stick around. Without further ado, please enjoy the discussion.
All right. Well, I also want to thank our panelists, especially if you're on the losing side. It's never easy to explain and possibly kind of process things, especially here on stage. And I also want to thank all of you for being here this evening. Let's jump right into my first question, which is really an open-ended question. I just want to see, how do you interpret the results of this election? We don't have to analyze what happened because we know what happened. We had a pretty clear, uniform shift to the right. If you look at here in Wisconsin, we've had 68 out of 72 counties moving in the Republican direction. And nationally, we see the same picture. So with this decisive victory that many had not anticipated, so we heard over and over again, this is a coin toss, this is a toss-up election. Many were surprised by those results. So the question for all of you is sort of, how do you think about it? How do you explain the results? Who wants to start?
Okay, so I think explaining the results, I think a lot of people coming from the Democratic Party, I think they still believe in some of the policies on their side and they still favor that side. Maybe some did switch over. We don't really know the stats for that. But I will say that I think people chose to take care of their country and the economy over the smaller policies that they see. Not saying it's not important. I know a lot of people look at different policies, but some of the smaller policies I think people put aside. We're looking at abortion and some of the transgender rights, and I think they chose to work towards the economy and how Trump did bring the economy up when he was president at his last term, and I think they decided to choose the country again and build our economy back up.
I guess my first point is I would disagree with the fact that it's been painted in the media as a landslide victory. I heavily disagree with that. Although a lot of counties did tend more Republican, started to shift that way, it was by very, very small margins, very small percentages. And I don't think it's fair to say that it was a massive landslide victory. Also on the point of how did it tend this way overall? I think former President Trump did a really good job in his campaign of painting a picture of a failing America. He painted a picture of a current economy that was on the decline, He painted a picture of a nation riddled with crime in every aspect of its communities. He painted a picture of an America that seemed weak on the global stage. Although I disagree and don't think that's necessarily true. If we look at things like the GDP under the Biden administration, it increased, more so than when it did under the Trump administration. A lot of people, when they talk about a failing economy, they talk about the record amounts of inflation that we experience. I'd like to note that in correlation with the inflation, we saw a relative increase in people's salaries and the pay across the nation. Inflation was at about 20%, and the increase in people's pay was about 19-ish%. We also saw an increase in overall employment and a decrease in unemployment. All of this does not paint a picture of a failing economy. Additionally, I personally believe, as well as a ton of experts across the nation, that there won't be much change in international conflict due to Trump's, re-election. So I don't think we're necessarily failing or weak as an American country. Especially on that note, the vast majority of Americans do not believe in more U.S. involvement in certain issues across seas. Lastly, on the aspect of crime has continually been trending down in the U.S., so that's not necessarily true as well. But he did a really, really good job at having Americans buy in to this image of a failing nation. And he blamed Biden for every single aspect of that. On that note, I also think American voters had a very, very difficult time differentiating between the Biden administration and the Harris campaign. So as Trump painted a picture of a failing America because of Biden, people automatically associated that with the Harris campaign.
I would have to say that I agree with the points that Zoe made, and I also would like to point out that Harris had the shortest general election presidential campaign in history, lasting only 107 days. The Democrats did fail in their nomination for Joe Biden and then switching to Kamala Harris, but I do think it is important to note that she did fall short by 5 million votes, and I agree with Zoe that it was not a landslide victory when she had the shortest campaign election ever. So I do think that she still made great progress. I do think also to point out sexism in the party is Minnie Timaraju, the chief executive of Reproductive Freedom for All, speaks out about how Democrats need to develop a long-term plan to confront sexism within the party and in the nation. I saw lots of canvassing dealing with the Kamala campaign, discussing rhetoric of how a woman can't run a country or even be in that type of leadership role. And it's hard to have conversations of equal opponents when many of the opposite side see a woman who can't even be in that role, period. So it's very hard. So I think Kamala Harris did a great job, even though she fell short.
Yeah, so I sort of had a similar takeaway. I mean, I think the economy was a very important part of this, and Trump told a story about the economy, and it's a story that resonated with a lot of voters. Some exit polls that NBC News did, they found out that 46% of the people interviewed said that their family's financial situation was worse off now than it was 4 years ago. And so it's sort of clear that they didn't want to vote for a continuation of the Biden administration. And while voters didn't really differentiate Harris from Biden, part of that I think falls on Harris and her campaign. I think there was opportunities for her to sort of differentiate herself, but she didn't. And so the metrics like GDP and unemployment, like you said, those and economists, the experts of it, they all have a good explanation of the current health of the economy. But that didn't necessarily resonate with voters. It didn't stick with them. There wasn't a translation between those numbers and their personal lives. Inflation is something that people are still dealing with, and I think ultimately they made that clear at the polls.
Yeah, let me follow up on these last couple of comments. Of course, when you lose an election, there should be some self-scrutiny. You want to look in the mirror and see what went wrong. At the same time, as Alivia said, there were only 107 days for the Harris campaign to really get off the ground and introduce herself to the American people. So my question, and of course, as Preston said, the economy, especially inflation, was a big issue. You don't have to be an economist to understand prices have gone up, and people around the world often have punished incumbent parties. So my question was this a winnable election for Democrats in hindsight at all? Could they have put anybody on the ticket that would have won them the election? Or was it just really a focus on the economy, inflation, and ultimately there was nobody who could have won that election for Democrats?
I will answer that question. I do not necessarily believe after Biden stepped down, only leaving 115 days necessarily to put a opponent up to run against Trump. I don't think that necessarily anyone would be able to grasp the American people in that quick amount of time, especially with Trump already being a president. Many people don't want to feel like their vote is going to waste, so they would rather pick a winning side than someone that they feel is going to lose anyways.
I agree with that. I think the Democratic Party lost a lot of people post the first presidential debate. I thought that was a really big blow for the Democratic Party and had a lot of voters swayed and picking sides before Kamala even stepped into the role to start campaigning.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, it's sort of a difficult situation. Kamala Harris really didn't have a whole lot of time. Biden officially stepped down in July 21st, and Kamala Harris became the official nominee August 5th. That was something around 100 days. And so would someone in a different position have fared any better? This is sort of speculation, but I think so. I think they would have been able to sort of distinguish themselves from Biden. They were able to sort of take a removed stance and say, I would have done things differently and I will do things differently. And maybe that would have stuck with voters a little bit more. But even then, when Biden stepped down, it was because he was polling really bad. They did not think he was going to win the election. And Kamala Harris did improve on places where Biden wasn't doing too good. And so we can look at it now and say, well, she did worse than Biden in 2020, but this is sort of a guess. I'd be willing to bet that she did better than Biden would have in 2024.
Also, after the election, we've had some Democrats going on TV and saying, we have a communication, a messaging issue. I'm wondering if this is all there is, or are there things that are more deeply rooted? If we just take a look at, and some people have argued that what we are seeing is this major realignment among voters. The Republican Party has become the working class party, it's become a much more multiracial party, and this is trend started in 2016, and it's just a continuation since then. And the Democrats with the old Obama coalition focusing on young voters, focusing on minority voters, that coalition has broken apart. So we're seeing something major. Do you see it that way, or do you see it in a much more simple way, where you look at, again, the inflation issue, the economy, the perceptions of it? So I'm wondering, are we seeing a realignment of the American public?
To answer that, that was a big loaded question. To focus first on the racial demographics changing, I think when looking at the exit polls by NBC News, we see a majority of young people in general voted for Harris. A majority of Black men and women voted for Harris. We see a majority of Latino women voted for Harris at 60%, while in opposition, Latino men voted 55% for Trump. In contrast, white men and white women majority voted for Trump, and we have seen a change in the Latino men and young white men supporting Trump over Harris compared to the Obama administration. But some point out, like NPR points out, for Latinos, that in each election, Democrats are seeing less support. Harris had less support from Latino voters than Biden. Biden had less support from Latino voters than Hillary, and Hillary had less support from Latino voters than Obama's administration. NPR also states how much evidence suggests Latino voters are becoming more of an economist popular vote rather than conservative. Donald Trump's talking points about no taxes on tips and restrictions on trade appeals to those who are blue-collar workers. Democrats, if they continue to fail to address the working class Americans, then this demographic shift we are seeing will continue to be permanent. I wouldn't say that all minority groups, though, are necessarily shifting, and I think you have to look at it more individually of race and gender. I also do think, though, that the Harris campaign did try to address some of the working class issues. She has supported and advocated for initiatives aimed at supporting families, home ownership, and health care. Like the child tax credit, Harris has supported expanding child tax credits, which provide direct financial support to families, helping reduce poverty and offering economic relief to parents. $25,000 for down payment assistance. Harris has proposed programs aimed at home buyers. This initiative is designed to help close racial wealth gaps and make homeowners more accessible. Medicare coverage for home-based senior care. Harris has advocated for policies that allow Medicare to cover home health care services for seniors. I do believe she did not focus her message to combat inflation as much as she should have, but it was a short amount of time of her campaign. In the future, Democrats need to focus on bridging the gap with the working class, but Trump focused his message on tax cuts, tariffs, and restrictions on trade to help Americans.
Just to reiterate some of what Olivia said over here, I do think that the Republican Party has been very successful in recent years in pulling more of that younger men demographic. I think we see a lot of young men resonating with the ideologies behind things like red pill content, in which the overarching message is reaching out to young men and saying, you are special, you matter. And I think that does sway people on a personal level to lean more Republican. Additionally, on that note, I do think we as a younger subset of the population have become very politically uneducated. I think removing civics programs from high schools has really affected our generation in the understanding of different political policies. I think we can look at states like Missouri, who overarchingly across many of their counties trended very red this election, but successfully passed socially progressive legislation related to the protection of abortion rights and increased minimum wage, as well as other primarily Democratic pushes. I think there's been a lot of confusion between Republican and Democratic policies, and I think it's being fueled by different candidates. I think one of the big things that comes to my mind was stimulus checks. A lot of people credited Trump with the stimulus check. People think very highly of his administration for that. In recent years, when we saw the hurricane relief that was being pushed out by the Biden administration, people were very critical of that, comparing it to the stimulus checks. But what people fail to realize is the stimulus checks was a very heavy Democratic push. It was pushed through Congress. Trump was not the one leading that push. It was a Democratic Congress. That was a Democratic policy, and to be able to say and credit that back to Trump is confusing.
I have the same question for you. Do you see this as a long-term realignment, and what appeals has Trump made to new demographics, and why do they seem to have worked? At least somewhat.
I guess, yeah, I sort of agree with Olivia. I think it might be long-term so long as they don't address it, but I'd imagine Democrats will have to reckon with it, and maybe in the midterms we'll see something else. As far as appeals Trump has made that might sort of stick with voters, he sort of promised standard Trump, lower taxes, right? He had his tax plan, I think, of 2017, and some people think very highly of that, and it helped some businesses and even middle-class people. And just generally, he's been promising to lower costs, and that's something that it affects everyone. The price of things, that matters, right? I mean, when people go to the grocery store, no matter what the cause of the inflation is, no matter what the cause of the rising prices are, people think about it and they notice it. And even something like housing, right? That's something that especially I think this is what has been appealing to younger voters, is they can't afford homes. And they know that they can't afford homes. They know that they won't be able to get one. And so Trump has sort of offered different ways to make housing more affordable and to make housing more available. And part of that ties in with his immigration policy. And I think this sort of goes back to, he was able to tell a story that was more, that maybe wasn't specific, but that was comprehensive, and it was a lot easier for people to buy into than maybe some of Harris's policies, which individually might look good to voters and might sort of perform well among them, but they didn't have this substance, this coherent narrative that they could buy into and bite into.
Yeah, on the topic of the home policies and home ownership, I'd like to note that Harris did have a policy that would allow subsidies for first-time homeowners to be able to help afford a down payment to buy their first house. I think it's important to note that this was a policy only targeted towards first-time homeowners in comparison to Trump's policies, which would theoretically lower the cost of all housing purchases. In certain areas of the nation right now, in cities, different areas like that, we see a big trend of people buying up tons of property, turning them into Airbnbs or jacking up the rent. This makes it unaffordable for younger people to rent a house or buy a house in those areas. And policies like Harris's policy to subsidize these down payments would help benefit the first-time homeowner, which is the demographic that I think Trump was trying to reach out to, but I think a lot of people did not focus on Harris's economic policies.
This event is live streamed by Wisconsin Eye. Wisconsin Eye focuses a great deal on state politics and Wisconsin politics, and therefore I want to ask you a little bit about, again, more of an open question. Are there any observations that stand out to you about how the campaign unfolded here in Wisconsin, and specifically about the Baldwin-Hovde race? Why did Harris lose? But Baldwin was able to pull off a victory.
I think specifically looking at the election with the presidents, I think the biggest thing that threw people off was, I know Harris didn't really differentiate herself from Biden, and going back to saying if another Democratic candidate ran, maybe they'd have a chance. I think they would have, because they would have differentiated themselves, and she really connected herself with him. And I know she didn't have as much time to go out there with her campaign, but I think anybody could have put a good campaign out there and won. But I think one of the biggest things that stood out was she was interviewed on The View and was asked if she would change anything from the Biden campaign when she was worked under him as vice president for 4 years. And she said she couldn't think of a thing, and said that she was a part of most of the decisions that were made. So I think that really scared people, because a lot of the things people saw in the past 4 years weren't anything that they wanted, especially with raised costs. I think that's one of the biggest things with the economy and inflation. So I think her saying that she didn't want anything different, she couldn't change anything, and she was a part of those policies with the Biden administration, I think that really scared people and turned them away.
Yeah, so sort of going off of that, I think it's important to note that it wasn't just Baldwin versus Hovde. It was Baldwin versus Hovde versus Lieger versus Anderson. There were two other candidates in the race, and both of them took more or less stances that appealed to generally conservatives. And so there's a good chance that they drew away from some Hovde voters. When you look at their vote shares of Lieger and Anderson, they add up to, at least the last time I checked, somewhere around 71,000. Baldwin only beat Hovde by about 29,000. So I think that's one reason why you might have seen Baldwin prevail but Harris lose. Also, Baldwin's a particularly strong candidate. In her 30 years of politics, she's never lost. I mean, you probably don't get reelected that many times without being able to go out and contact and sort of make those connections with voters. Additionally, I think we saw Baldwin take on more moderate stances and really making appeals to Wisconsin voters. I just out of sort of what's in the back of my mind is with Wisconsin farmers. She really made an effort to appeal to Wisconsin farmers and show that she was going to take care of them. And there's another ad also about American jobs. And so I think those appeals work, and I think this is what we probably had some Trump-Tammy voters.
I also think it's important to note that Baldwin is not a super duper Democrat of the Democrats. She has supported a vast majority of bipartisan legislation in which it really resonates with Wisconsin people that she's going to do the best for the people rather than for the party she represents.
Let me ask you, since first of all, I feel like I'm not talking to undergraduates. I feel like talking to people who have been doing this for many years. You guys are very articulate and have so many facts and really impressed. But do you think the results of this election will motivate more young people to become involved in politics? Do you think both parties also pay enough attention to the issues that young people care about?
So first, yes, I do think this will get more people involved in politics, especially young people. Unfortunately, I do think it's going to continue to radicalize people. I think we are going to see people continue to trend more one way or the other. And overall, I just think that's a bad thing for American politics. I think we need to spend a lot more time trying to find where we can actually meet in the middle. And I think this election, like fueling as like a means to radicalize, especially young women, to trend far, far blue, I think it will hurt American politics overall, even though more people will be participating.
I believe that the results of the election will motivate more young people to become involved. I've already seen many younger college students who switched their majors to law or political science after the election. I think a lot more people will be. I have seen online. It's been really great for me, I think. But I just think more. Okay. I think more people will be involved.
Yeah, I also think after this election, more young people will be involved. I've already seen it already. The one thing that makes me nervous, though, is a lot of young people, like Zoe said, it's kind of been taken out of schools to educate people, taking the civics exam and educating them on different policies. But it's really hard to do that because how can you choose one person to be non-biased for either side and teach them, here's what these policies are, here's what these are for both sides, but also like where can we meet in the middle, to be together, like to bring our country together again. But I think it's really hard for the young people that are getting more involved because not only are they not educated on some of the policies, I don't think they're educated on the sources to use. And I think a lot of them go off social media. So we all have Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and all of this, and everything gets twisted and slanted. And I think people need to be educated not only on the different policies, but also on the correct sources to use.
The title of this panel is also Now What? Looking Forward. So I want to kind of pay attention to the future, obviously, and see where we go from here. I wonder what you think the Trump administration will look like in the first few months. We've already seen some appointments or some speculation about upcoming appointments, and we should take this all very seriously. We are on a college campus, emotions are running high. Yes, there is excitement on one side. On the other side, there's also a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of fear about what's to come. So what type of policy changes, both domestically and internationally, do you anticipate, and how will they be received? Perhaps internationally, of course, Ukraine is going to be a big issue in how Trump and his administration are going to deal with it, but also the Middle East. So this is a pretty big question in terms of what do you anticipate. But I'm just wondering what your expectations are going forward, and maybe your hopes and also your fears.
I think to start with this new election, new president in office, I think the first thing internationally that we'll see is we'll gain more respect from the foreign leaders, because I think a lot of people, when Biden was in office, I think they didn't take him seriously. He was kind of viewed as a joke, and I think we lost a lot of that respect that we got. A lot of people fear Trump in a good way, and he made those connections with the foreign leaders, and I think that will be a lot greater as people won't live in fear as much from threats from the other countries. I also think that we'll see illegal immigration decrease majorly. That was something that happened with the Biden and Harris administration, and they let all these illegal immigrants come in. He's going to be working on building the wall, stopping that from happening, and also working on deporting as many as he can that came in illegally. I think it's unfair, especially to the people that worked hard and did it the fair way to come into the country the right way. And they were probably more upset than any citizen of America who was born and raised here, because they worked hard to come here the right way when all the other people did was just walk in and get here illegally. So I think that problem will be fixed majorly once Trump's in office. And also with taxes, we'll see tax decreases as well. He wants to decrease taxes with overtime, which will focus more on like the blue collar workers, work a lot of hours and can take extra money home to their families. And he wants to do the same thing with tips. No taxes on tips, again, so people can take more income home to their families.
So I think with Trump, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, but there's also a lot of unknowns. I mean, he's been appointing people and sort of tapping on people's shoulders, and so we have an idea of who's going to fill his positions. But what actual changes are going to occur? I think we just have what Trump has said on the campaign trail, and I think what we're going to see is that proposal, and then we're going to actually see it take form and take shape. And I'd imagine in that process, it's probably going to be tempered somewhat, because while the GOP will probably win the House, it has the Senate, and we have Trump in the White House, there's still going to be dissent within the party. And so I think they're going to have to work together and compromise on some things. And I think that's going to result in maybe his tariffs not being as high as he said they're going to be, or maybe there's going to be less of them than there actually are, because he can't just snap his fingers and make it happen. People have to agree on it. And so I think that we're going to see some of these kind of more crazy sort of statements from the campaign trail actually materialize in things that are much more reasonable.
I would say I anticipate changes in immigration policy, especially since Donald Trump has promised to close borders and mass deportation. Trump has already announced the new border czar, Tom Homan. Tom Homan has been asked how he plans to not separate families at the border and has responded by deporting families altogether, even with status. I think we'll see dangerous policies that disregard birthright citizenship for those who are here legally. He also said he would invoke the Alien Enemy Act of 1798 to help his deportation plans. This law was last used to put Japanese Americans in Japanese internment camps. I think invoking this law again would be dangerous for Americans who are non-white. I anticipate policy changes on tariffs on imports from China and Mexico, since Trump has spoken on how this is helpful to bring back jobs back to the U.S., even though economists have warned that this will raise costs and lower output. According to the USA Today, more than 10 analyses showed Trump's proposed tariffs would have a harmful effect on the American economy. According to the Tax Foundation analysis found the tariffs together add up to $79 billion, which theoretically leads to an additional $625 in taxes annually for the average U.S. household. The Tax Foundation also argues that tariffs would raise prices while reducing output and employment. I anticipate drastic policy changes affecting the Department of Education. Trump's Agenda 47 proposed eliminating the Department of Education established by President Jimmy Carter, which provides programs such as Title I funding for low-achieving or high-poverty K-12 schools in need of support, as well as Pell Grants for undergraduate students in high financial needs. Trump's campaign has outlined a plan that, as a centerpiece of education, an emphasis on the way Americans live. He's also called for dismantling of diversity initiatives in education and federal funding cuts for schools or programs that feature critical race theory, gender ideology, or other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content. I also anticipate laws that will negatively affect women. Project 2025 has outlined plans to end access to medical abortion used in 63% of abortions in the U.S. Also to allow hospitals to deny emergency life-saving abortion care to pregnant patients in crisis. Establish an abortion surveillance system forcing states to report the personal details of all patients receiving abortion care. Restrict access to birth control, emergency contraception, and other reproductive health services. A majority of Project 2025 contributors work in the first Trump administration around his campaign or transition teams, and many are expected to serve in the second Trump administration. I believe putting so many resources in prosecuting doctors and in limiting women's right to health care, even if their lives are at risk, will only worsen our country's maternal mortality rate. With the U.S. being compared to all other highly developed countries, has the lowest life expectancy at birth, the highest maternal and infant mortality rate.
I'd like to circle back to a few points made over there. First, the point on immigration, you touched on this. I think the mass deportation of people is going to be very harmful. I urge you guys to think about the ag industry. Our ag industry has a lot of illegal immigrants who fuel those jobs, who are working those jobs. I think we will see a big hit to our agriculture industry within the United States if these extreme policies, the ones that he was pushing for, the ones he said and promised to enact, are enacted. I think we will see a huge hit to our domestic agricultural industry. I think it would be very detrimental for America to take that big hit. I think if we have to start importing more of our agricultural needs from other countries, it would be devastating to our economy. Also on the point of the variation within the party, I think it's important to note that the Conservative Party, the Republican Party, continues to trend more towards the MAGA version of Republicanism. It's just how it's been going. There have been more people now supporting him than ever, and that's crazy to me. We see the Senate trending, went red. We see the House of Representatives most likely, trending more red. We see a Supreme Court that has continued to be enacted by, Republican presidents and support, Trump's vision of America. I expect within the Supreme Court that during the Trump administration, Clarence Thomas is going to step down and be replaced by another Supreme Court justice put in by Trump. I think when we have all three branches of our government trending more Republican or even more Democrat, just more towards one side, I think it's detrimental to our checks and balances. The very foundation of America, the very foundation of democracy could be threatened. I don't know if it is. I don't know if it will be, but I think we are in a precarious situation right now. And then circling back to the point about Project 2025, we've heard throughout this election cycle lots of discussion of Project 2025 from both sides of the aisle. Democrats talking about how scary this proposal and this plan is, and then Republicans responding and saying that this is not something they're going to enact, specifically Trump. I think it's very important to note that the Heritage Foundation, the creators of Project 2025, created a similar proposal the last time that Trump was elected. Okay? And 64% of those policies that they suggested were actually implemented within the first 2 years of the first Trump administration. I don't think it is far off to say that just because he said he wasn't going to enact these policies doesn't mean that he's promised, he's bound not to. So I think we will actually see some of these policies, be implemented. And whether that's, education, abortion rights, contraceptive access, all these things, I think time will tell how America will be affected.
Well, this is the place for civil discourse, so I'm going to give you a chance to respond.
All right, we'll see if I can remember some of the things. I'll try to respond to most of them. I think first off, well, yes, the Republican Party has become more friendly toward Trump in the last 8 or 10 years. I mean, the people who are being elected now are generally supportive of Trump and have Trump endorsements, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to agree with every single policy that he proposes. The United States is very diverse, right? We have 50 states, and we have people from different walks of life, and those people have found their way into political offices. And so I don't think they're just going to agree with every single thing, and there's going to be uniformity. There are GOP members who are really concerned about the deficit, and so they're probably going to at least try to change or alter any things that are going to increase that deficit. And so I don't think we're going to see this just tide of enactments of these statutes and of these bills that are going to be perfectly in accordance with Trump. I just don't think that's going to happen, despite the fact that the Republicans have the majority in the House. And, well, yes, I do think it could be a difficult situation when we have a unified government, when we have all three branches controlled by one party. I do think there's enough diversity within the parties to sort of account for some of those things. And the Supreme Court, it is definitely more conservative, right? We have 6 justices that lean that way, but that doesn't mean that they vote that way every time. We take notice of all these 5-4 decisions that are really, really close, but we really don't take notice of the 8-1s and the 9-0s where they're actually in agreement on a lot of things. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as a public come up in the news. I know you mentioned how maybe Thomas might be asked to retire. I was thinking about Sotomayor maybe should step down before the new president, the president-elect, takes office. And so there's a lot of things that we just don't know yet. And I think we shouldn't sort of jump too far ahead. And with Project 2025, that's something that Trump has just distanced himself from. He said on the campaign trail that he hasn't read, he's not really sure of what it is. And then he said, I think something more along the lines of, well, I haven't read it, I don't know all of it, but I'm sure there's some good things in it, but there's things that I don't agree with. It's really long, it's 900 pages. I don't think Trump has actually read it in its entirety, and I don't think he's just gonna, sign his name and have everything there become enacted, because there is differences among the different states. And so I think that's something that's important to keep in mind, and that's sort of all I remember from the thing. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like me to respond to.
Before we go to the Q&A, let me just give you a chance just to say something that perhaps hasn't come up yet. Of course, there's so much to dissect, and we can only ask so many questions is there something that's on your heart that or some of the points that you did some research that you really wanted to get out tonight?
I think Alivia mentioned earlier about, you said how the racial theory classes and gender studies were going to be eliminated. You said that was one of Trump's things he mentioned, correct? You said that? I think that classes like that, I've heard that these have been mentioned on being put into elementary schools. I think any class like that should be an elective. I think it should be a choice. I don't think anybody should be forced to take a class like that. And I think it's also up to the parents of the child to educate them on racial theory or any gender study. I don't think that's up to anybody else. I think they can figure it out on their own, or if they want to take a class like that, they can learn about it from somebody else besides their parents. I think people are too young to be introduced to those things, and they can also be very biased depending on who teaches it. Like how we said, students have to be more educated about different policies. You can't choose the right person to teach that. Everyone's going to be biased in one way. Other thing I'd like to note is looking at abortion. I think this was really looked at the wrong way during the whole campaign for the election, because that's the whole thing that she campaigned about. She said, she supports abortion. She just said it over and over again, but it's not up to the presidents, it's up to the states. I think that was really overlooked, and everybody just, kind of shunned on Trump about it because maybe he's not all for it, but it's not up to them anymore. It's up to the states. I don't think that's going to get turned over again. And even if one state, if Wisconsin makes it illegal, well, then Illinois makes it legal. So you can go to Illinois and get one. And the other thing with abortion, I think it's being misunderstood on the difference between intentionally having an abortion, where a woman just gets pregnant and wants to have one just because they don't want to deal with having a kid. There's other ways to not get pregnant, right? We all know it. We've all taken health class. I think with the rape cases, I think that's really unfortunate. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen to a woman. But there's not a lot of rape cases where the woman gets pregnant from it. And, it's still difficult, how they have to go through that time, that hurt that happened to them. But maybe that, I'm looking at it as a gift from God. Maybe you were meant to have that child, or maybe that child was meant to be for somebody else. Have the child. There's a lot of people in this world that struggle from reproductive problems, or they just can't have a kid and they would love one themselves. And giving one away for somebody else, I think would be really appreciated. And another fact on abortion is I think the difference, it's getting mixed up with having one intentionally and being in the doctor's office and making a really difficult decision with a doctor and a mother and a father on whose life they have to save if something goes wrong during that pregnancy. I don't view that as an abortion. I think an abortion is intentionally doing it because you just don't want to have that kid. And I think making that decision in the doctor's office is a completely different scenario.
I would just like to respond to that by saying that no critical race theory is taught in K through 12. That's only in college universities. So critical race theory is not in your elementary schools or in your middle school classrooms either. I'd like to respond to the abortion point too by this summer I spent my work working for an abortion clinic in Georgia, spending all my time they don't do abortions because of the 6-week abortion ban in Georgia, but spending all my time doing research on women who are put at risk, women who want these pregnancies, that have unviable pregnancies, but are unable to get an abortion. And you may not count that as someone who is dying and at risk and needs that abortion. You may not count that as abortion, but that's what an abortion is defined as in these bills. Removing a miscarriage is defined as an abortion. And when we give it up to the states, and not everyone has rights, and only some people have rights, and Illinois may have the choice. Low-income people don't get to travel 8 to 10 hours. When you're going into the South and it's a majority of total abortion bans and you're having to drive 14 hours, low-income people or middle-class people don't get that choice. And higher income people do. And I think that's depressing too, to have a baby with a half-developed head. This was one woman I spoke to this summer and spoke to personally for my research with her baby's head was half-developed and she had to drive 14 hours. She had the privilege and the ability to drive those 14 hours, but should she have spent that time grieving on that 14-hour drive instead of in the comfort of her home in her state and having that health care in her home state?
All right, I just got told I got a minute and a half to address this all, so we're going to try and get through it. The vast majority of women who have abortions are not single women. They are married mothers, married women who already have children who cannot afford to have another kid. It is really dangerous to get rid of abortion access while also getting rid of affordable child care, while also getting rid of affordable, stipends for these mothers, welfare programs. WIC programs, all these things that make it so somebody possibly could afford, a child. Additionally, getting rid of abortion access does not get rid of abortion itself. Just because abortion is not legal does not mean it's not happening. People will continue to get abortions in similar rates as if abortion was illegal, if not the same rates. So doing that does not prevent these abortions from happening. All it does is prevent the safety of women who need these services.
All right, thank you very much. This is a good time, I feel like, for a little break here and to give the audience a chance to ask questions. We don't pre-filter questions. We have a microphone right there, and anybody who wants to ask a question can walk up to it. And the only request I have is that please keep the question fairly short, and hopefully we can also really ask questions and not just provide comments.
Definitely be a question. First of all, does everybody on the panel understand populism? I think that's really important concept that's not been discussed, because this election is probably the best example of populism, especially if you look at the Baldwin race versus the Harris race in the state of Wisconsin. Again, we're talking about Wisconsin. If you look at northern Wisconsin, you look at the voting trends, I don't know if you looked at the percentages, where do you think populism versus partisanship came into play in this election? And I want to know if you thought about it, looked at it, or have analyzed it rather than partisanship, but populism.
I guess I don't want to speak to the other panelists, but I don't know if any one of us have looked at the specific, maybe county-based voting trends and look at maybe what people's sort of incentive for voting was. And I think populism is an important thing in this election, but I think just generally, and I think part of the reason that we sort of talked about it through a partisan lens is because that's the way most people understand it. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add.
If not, we move on to the next question.
First of all, I want to congratulate all the panelists. You did a great job. Presented your case very well and in a very civil manner. And so you're to be congratulated. But one issue that didn't come up that I'm curious to know how people of your age group in particular now feel about the issue of character in American political life. I'm old enough to remember when a candidate who was caught having an illicit affair on a boat, Gary Hart, was eliminated immediately from consideration for the presidency. Now, we don't have time for me to list the transgressions of Donald Trump. But somebody who's bragged about and been found guilty by a civil court jury of sexual assault, of financial fraud, of paying hush money and lying about it to a porn star. Somebody who's chief of staff said he's a fascist who says he admires Hitler. How is it that we, looking forward, I assume some of you will want to be parents someday. Is this the kind of role model that you feel should be held up as President of the United States for your children? What has happened to character? And what does that mean going forward? If you want to run for office, does that mean you should start going out committing sexual assault, fraud? As long as you make a lot of money and become famous, that's good enough to put you in office? It's an issue that hasn't been touched on here. I would like to hear the answer.
Thank you, Marty.
I would say I agree with your point of character, sir. I think it's very devastating as a woman that the country would pick someone convicted of sexual assault. I don't know how we move forward because I feel like politicians used to have some set of standards, and I think after the last few elections that standards have just kept declining. But I think character should be considered more in our future campaign or elected people. So.
I think it's unfortunate, but poor character is almost rewarded in the current state of our media. You say something that's so just like, what did they just say? And it's everywhere. You are famous, you're everywhere. I thought about this with the endorsements behind Kamala Harris, actually. The fact that her being endorsed by 100 and some Nobel Prize winning, like some of the smartest people in the world, got less media than her being endorsed by Taylor Swift. That was shocking to me. Like, we don't care anymore as a society because the media rewards the bad behavior. They reward the celebrities. They reward almost like the glamorization of American politics becoming a reality TV show.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I don't think anyone would say that character is not important for those who are running for office. I think a lot of people want characters, or want politicians who have integrity. That being said, I don't want to like overgeneralize and say what everyone was thinking, but when I've been preparing for this and reading articles, a lot of people acknowledge that Trump had faults, and a lot of people maybe didn't even like Donald Trump as a person, right? They agreed with you on a lot of those things, and they said that that's bad, and they don't support that, they don't condone that. But they saw this choice between two people, and then they made that decision, right? And they saw the economy maybe as being something that was more important to them than they thought was more worthwhile than maybe having a leader who was, had less faults. And then I think another thing, I guess, is politicians, they, like I think Zoe was talking about, they need to be popular, right? They have to have media coverage, and I think certain sort of outbursts get them that media coverage. We have sort of notable, more or less extremist politicians who have sort of gotten the position because they make so many headlines by saying these just outrageous things. And so that is something definitely to consider. But I don't know if it's necessarily something that people enjoy about their politicians, but it's something that they just have to deal with and that they contend with.
I mean, I disagree. I do think people enjoy just the shock factor of it and the almost vulgarity of it. Like, we saw Marjorie Taylor Greene openly attack somebody's appearance in committee chambers. We saw it. It was publicized. It went viral on TikTok. And people were just laughing in the comments. Nobody was like, where's the decorum? There was just a complete disregard for the fact of how unprofessional that was. It went viral. It trended. And so many people were laughing about it and now in support of Marjorie Taylor Greene for this out-of-pocket, offhanded comment. And it's sad, but people do like just the shock factor and the almost poor character of these people.
Next question.
This question, in a certain way, builds off the previous question, but goes in a different direction. What I'm trying to figure out is the role of lying and deception and a lack of knowledge about reality in the candidate's discourse. So, for example, when Donald Trump says he's concerned about inflation, and all these people want to vote for him because they think he's going to be concerned about inflation, but his policy of tariffs are going to be inflationary. His efforts at the deportation of undocumented people in the country is going to destroy the construction and the agricultural industry, which will be inflationary for home building and food in the grocery stores. I just don't see how the kinds of deceptions that Trump perpetuated throughout his campaign should be found acceptable. Moreover, I am curious what you're going to do to get the American electorate a little more logically grounded as far as understanding the implications of the policies that the people are actually arguing on behalf of. So, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really sad fact that the American people don't understand certain policies, and I'd even argue a vast majority of policies. the Google search, what is a tariff, started trending post-election results started. People are now getting educated after the fact. Another Google search that's been trending is, how do I change my vote? So I think it's really devastating that Americans, especially younger generational Americans, don't understand certain policies. I think something we can do is bring back civics courses in mass numbers again. And although there's the argument of, okay, well, they might be biased, we all know that teachers tend to be a little more Democratic leaning. I had a civics teacher in the 8th grade who was a vet. He was very unbiased. It wasn't until well after I graduated from middle school that I ever found out that he was a Democrat. And I think if we can find more educators like that, more people who can just list out, here are the facts, more people to inspire critical thinking, more people to inspire just people reading the bills. You would be surprised how many news articles will tell you this, and this about a bill, and then you can actually read it and it's like, oh, that's not actually what the legislation is saying at all. So I think we just need to do a better job and say that this is actually what we want in our schools, even if the system might not be perfect, even if people might have a little bias. I still think it's important to push for.
I mean, yeah, sort of just going off of that, I think the information levels among voters in general are pretty low. I know right before the election, there were searches for who's on the ticket, did Joe Biden drop out? I mean, people weren't necessarily aware of some of these things, which is sort of crazy, right? And I think increasing civic education and encouraging that in schools and elementary schools and middle schools is great. And I think that's something that a lot of people agree on. And I think it would serve to maybe increase people's trust in their politicians, because a lot of people are sort of wary of their politicians. They don't necessarily think that they're working in their best interest. And it's sort of getting to what you sort of mentioned, how could people vote for Donald Trump, with his lies or with his maybe proclivity for stretching the truth. I think that's something that Democrats try to deal with. And that's sort of what they spent their campaign arguing is, how can you vote for him? But I think ultimately maybe the better question was, why would you vote for him? And I think people made that clear. They care about the economy. They care about character also. They care about lying. They care about abortion. But sometimes those things take sort of secondary places to their more important values. One of them might be religion, right? I mean, we saw in the southern United States, specifically the Southwest, he lost some of that Latino vote because of Kamala Harris lost some of that Latino vote because of the Democrats' positions on certain things that people of certain religions didn't necessarily agree with. And so I think it's important to understand that sometimes people make decisions that they don't consider ideal, but they consider it their only choice.
I mean, I guess the one thing that I think is a little sad that we saw in this election, especially with the media, was a lot of the discussion of the politicians' attacks of each other. That was something that was heavily media-sized throughout when Biden was in the election, when Harris was in the race. We saw this a ton of. That was what got the most coverage. Whereas the actual policies of people saying, this is what I believe and this is how it will affect the nation, came at the bottom of the list of what was reported on. And I think that's sad. We can't have an educated population. We can't have people who understand these policies if what they're reading about is not the policies. So I think it's not just a civics, education background, but I think we need to demand better from media sites. And we also need to do better as a population of, okay, this clickbaity title, I'm not going to click on it because I'd rather get actual factual information.
And perhaps, if I may, I will just add one little point, because just before I came here, I watched a little video from Van Jones, who was on CNN, posting on his own social media page. And he said, one thing we have to understand is that people live in their own social media world where they get algorithms fed and they see things just through what is being given to them. And it's very difficult. We always think why don't you see that, right? But yeah, it's because my experience on the phone is very, very different from yours, right? So he kind of pointed that out. Next question.
Get off your phones. Thank you. I appreciate your positions and your statements on abortion. You talked a lot, sort of focused more on the economy or the economics of it. I'm wondering but nobody mentioned the fact that you really, or mentioned that you're really, as women, second-class citizens. We are. I'm a woman too. Because we do not have the same rights. Nobody's going into the medical office with Preston, but there is going to be the big brother watching over when you go in. How do you feel about that? How does your age group react to that? Because I didn't hear anything of that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it. I don't really enjoy arguing like the morality aspect of it because I can't convince somebody of my worth. I don't believe that women should have that right. Me saying it's based off of the value of a woman is not going to convince them, but possibly economics could sway it, that kind of argument would. I do think it's very scary for women. I think it's very sad as a woman that this will be following us for a while. This is not something that's going to be a quick fix. I don't even think if Harris would have won the election and still had a red Congress, I don't think it would have been something that would have been fixed. I don't think so. And it's sad and it's unfair and it's very anti-feminism to have a policy that only targets women and the bodily autonomy of women. I think if roles would have been reversed, okay, there was men in this position, there wouldn't have been, this type of result. If it was a law that affected the bodily autonomy of a man, I don't think it would have ever been a huge issue that came up over and over and over again.
We're just about to say we'd love to hear questions from students, and there it is. Yeah, wonderful.
I think a topic that didn't really get a ton of time in the discussion, which I know we're running out of time limits here, but was the conversation about illegal immigration. It did come up that there was acknowledgement that the agriculture industry might take a big hit from the mass deportation of illegal immigrants and the construction industry. But my question is, where do we draw that line? Like, where are we willing to kind of make exceptions? Like, they might be illegal immigrants, but they are contributing to our society. And where do we create that division between acceptable and unacceptable when it comes to illegal immigration?
I think a big fear with illegal immigration is this idea of like illegal aliens coming in to like commit heinous crimes against U.S. citizens. And that's been a big narrative that's been pushed for a long time. I think it's important to note that policies that strengthen the immigration process and deport people who are here to support the economy and whatnot, that's not going to stop somebody who wants to come do a bad thing. That policy is not going to protect people from criminals. If a criminal wants to come in, they will find a way in. It doesn't matter how strict you make the immigration policy.
Would love to hear from this side too. Yeah.
I guess I can see like if it took a hit, right? But there's so many people still in America that don't have jobs. The unemployment rate's still high, and it's okay. Some of these people are coming in, like you said, and they want to help the society, but they came in the wrong way. Like and a lot of these people are committing crimes. Okay, yeah, there's some that came in the right way or came in the wrong way for the right thing. They aren't committing those crimes, but how are you supposed to differentiate? I mean, you could walk past somebody in the street and you don't know what they're thinking. They have to come in the right way. I don't think there's any change about it. I don't think that agriculture and construction will take a big hit. I think other people will take these jobs because it wasn't like this in the past when Trump was in office, and he brought the economy back to where it should be, and he did a really great job doing that. And it dropped so much there's thousands of illegal immigrants in America right now, and that happened under the Biden and Harris administration. And while you say it could take a hit, I don't think it will, and I think it's terrible that it's accepted that these illegal aliens are allowed to come in here. And while the other people did, and they came in fair and worked hard for it.
And I just disagree. I do not think that. Have you heard of a concept called underemployment? It's when somebody is employed, but they are not working to the best of their means. I myself, once I get my college degree, I am not going to go to California and start picking grapes. I'm not going to do it. I would rather be unemployed in Wisconsin than have to move across the country to work an ag job that was taken away from somebody because they were deported. It's not going to fix it. Employment, which is the statistic that measures not just, so unemployment is the statistic of how many people don't have a job. Underemployment is when somebody has a job, but they are not working to their full ability, or, college educated person who wants to go into the field of marketing, now working at McDonald's, underemployed. So what we measure is employment, which is when people are employed to the best of their ability, which has actually increased by 12% under the Biden administration. I think this is a really big concern. I think we will see if we get rid of, these people who are working these ag jobs, these construction jobs, you're going to see a decrease in the percentage of employment or an increase in the percentage of unemployment. This is not the right way to create more jobs. Kicking people out, making them lose their job is not going to make people want to work in the ag industry. It just won't.
I would like to respond to the point of people need to come in the right way. I think that's very dangerous rhetoric of when we have specific regulations for the southern border that the northern border isn't met the same, or European countries. I think America has a long history of deciding who can be let in depending on what race or country they come from, in what decade and how they're feeling. And we even had a Muslim ban under African and Middle Eastern countries from immigration under Trump's last presidency. I think it's very dangerous to say they need to come in the right way when our rules are very racist in history and are still presently, even looking at Biden's immigration laws aren't necessarily the solution, but the southern border has way more regulations, and that affects low-income people, that you can get a visa if you're able to fly in or make your appointment in your home country. But if you are actually fleeing for violence and persecution in your country and can't wait for your appointment and you travel, you will not be allowed to even be heard for your case. You're completely wiped off. I think it's very dangerous to say you need to come in the right way when our laws aren't equal at all.
Just a heads up, we have time for 2 more questions.
My question is also about the Deportation Act, which was kind of answered, but do you think that after Trump's biggest Deportation Act, will the U.S. citizens have a better chance of getting their jobs back that the immigrants have taken?
I would say that I guess we would have some of our jobs, but I think the jobs that we're getting back, Americans aren't going to work or take either. So.
Yeah, and I think it's very unfair to say that they came in and took jobs. I don't think that these ag jobs, these construction jobs, these manual labor hard jobs are the ones that were snatched away from the American people. I just don't think it's fair. And I really urge you to think about this, and everybody else. But why do we as Americans have more of a right to freedom than anybody else in the world? Why do we have more of a right to a job than anybody else in the world? We are all people. We are all people struggling on the same rock, shooting through the earth. And I don't think it's fair to say just because they fled a bad situation, they deserve less freedom, less human rights, less rights to work. I just don't think it's fair.
I mean, yeah, I think this is a really interesting conversation. It's something that a lot of people care about. I mean, it was a pretty prevalent issue that people talked about. I think we've sort of been talking about the utility of immigration, right? Like the benefits or maybe the downsides of immigration. But I think part of the thing is principle, right? People, they see the United States as a country. Maybe they were born in, maybe they became citizens through the legal process, and they see the fact that people can just enter as sort of unfair in its own way. And so I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. And while I don't think, I guess I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I think the majority of Americans would say, yes, people should be able to leave dangerous situations. They should be able to improve their lives. They should be able to maybe come to America, become a citizen, and live the American dream. There's a process for that, and there's steps to take. And by not taking those steps, you're sort of draining resources from people who are trying to do it the right way. And another thing is we sort of solve these natural disasters, when maybe the response times were slower or people felt like they were left behind, when they see immigrants being given housing, or illegal immigrants specifically, I want to clarify, being given housing or being given these sort of benefits to sort of facilitate their integration, they see it as being unfair because a lot of these people have been in the United States their entire lives, have paid taxes, have maybe even raised children and contributed, and they're almost being left behind, or at least that's the perception that they have, that they're being left behind in favor of people who didn't even come in legally.
With the concept of illegal immigrants, it's a lot more expensive to go through the process to deport them out of the country than it would be to extend a legal way for them to be here. I think it's very telling that the policy is to up and get rid of people instead of providing them a legal route to become a legal citizen. I also think it's harmful to have all these laws and rules and regulations against illegal immigrants, including mass deportation, but then at the same time, lessen the amount of legal immigrants we are going to let in. I think it would be an entirely different story to say, hey, we are against illegal immigration, but we have all these new policies and procedures of letting these people in legally, or giving people who are already here a way to become a legal citizen. So I just don't see the point in deporting people, saying that we support people coming in the right way, the legal way, and then limiting the number of people who can be here legally.
I will just say too, immigrants without status pay taxes and contribute to our economy while they don't reap any of the benefits and not apply for scholarships, do not get welfare or health care or any of the benefits, but pay a ton of money every year.
I was just going to say, they use our infrastructure and stuff that American taxpayers pay for. And so I think, we can get into the numbers, but I think something important to keep in mind is that if we don't have these laws, right? We can lower them and then people, or don't have any laws, and people won't be illegal immigrants, but that's not how nations work, right? We need to have some structure, we need to have some basis. And well, I don't think there's anyone here who's saying, we don't want anyone to come to our country. We have to be able to take care of ourselves first. When there's people who can't afford homes, when there's people who can't afford food, when there's all these issues that are happening in our own country, people see it as being unfair that we're, letting in these people and paying for them with their own tax dollars. And this sort of also ties into our stances on foreign policy and stuff. But I think it's just important to keep in mind that people don't want to deny these benefits in the United States. A lot of people love their country, but they just think it's important that the country goes first.
We have only time for one more question.
All right, so this is kind of two questions, so I'm kind of cheating, but it'll be good. So I just want to know from Alivia's and Zoe's side, what do you think should be the Democrats' plan going forward responding to this election loss? Because I agree it wasn't a landslide, but there were 8 million less people voting in this election than 2020, but Kamala had around 9 million less votes than Joe Biden. That's a pretty bad look. And then for Anna and Reese, I just want to know, what do you think the Republicans will do, or how do you think they should do it to consolidate the power? Because now they have all three branches, essentially. And that means a lot of things have changed. I just want to know what your guys' thoughts are on that.
I think the best thing that the Democratic Party could do going into next election is put up another central candidate. Put up somebody who's not super far left, and then lean back into the bipartisanship of said candidate, of having Republicans come out and endorse he or she as the candidate for the Democratic Party. Push for, we clearly saw a lot of Americans are really focusing on the economy. Focus your campaign around that. I think we saw a big push in this campaign on abortion rights, which the vast majority of Americans do support. It's 70%. But they do care about the economy more. That's what Preston was talking about. I think they need to lean more into their, economic policies. You didn't see that really talked about in the media. You didn't see what Harris's economic policies or stances were. Even though she had some that I thought were really, really good, that wasn't publicized. And I think that's something the Democratic Party could do better on. I think especially in rural areas, highlighting the policies that those people care about it would be the best thing to do. Be a little bit more strategic in your campaign.
I agree mostly with what Zoe said. I'd also say that Democrats took a fault with supporting Israel. I think a lot of young voters felt very conflicted about voting for Democrats, and I saw a lot of young people in general saying they won't participate in elections at all because of Kamala Harris's support for Palestine. But that's just my personal opinion.
I mean, yeah, that's a really good question about where do Republicans go from here? What does the GOP do? And I don't really have I think a good answer, but I think there's high expectations. I mean, I think a lot of people have high hopes for what the Trump administration is going to accomplish, at least in regard to the economy. And so I think the best thing we can do is sort of find the common sense, practical approach and work together to achieve that, even if that means maybe sometimes having to reach across the aisle to achieve that support.
All right, this brings us to the end of this event. I really want to thank our panelists. I thought they did a fantastic job. I'm really proud to work here when I hear all of them. And so let's give it up for all of them. And with that being said, I will give the last word to Preston. I think he has closing remarks.
You have been watching a production of Wisconsin Eye, your unfiltered window into legislative deliberations and public policy programming, where our mission is to provide Wisconsinites an opportunity to access the legislative process and connect with conversations that inform our citizenry. Please consider supporting our mission, and thank you for watching. Wisconsin Eye, policy made public.